We're going to be in the book of Joel again, chapter 2. You know, I really enjoy, I've used, for years I've used my iPad to speak from and preach off of, but I always have to make sure that I've got it on Do Not Disturb, because my ADD brain, like the slightest little thing that can come by, I'm like, oh, what's going on now? So it happened a while back. I was speaking and I was using my iPad and I'd forgotten to turn it off, and for some reason I forget what it was, but my wife needed to tell something to me, and assumed that I should have assumed that I would have had it on Do Not Disturb, and I got a string of text messages coming in from Diana letting me know something that needed to be said or announced or something, and that was all my brain saw was just cha-ching, 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 and so I've got to make sure I've got that off. So I've got to work on the, keeping the distractions at bay when you've got an ADD brain like this one. All right, Joel chapter 2, and we're gonna continue our study here in the book of Joel. Last week we talked a little bit about what does it look like when Christians face adversity, or when the world is crashing all around you, then how should we as Christians respond, right? And I made reference back to chapter 1 where Joel is describing this plague of locusts that has come in, and remember he describes this really cool thing where the locusts had gone in. They start off as little grubs, and then over the course of time they'll bury themselves into the ground, and then they'll hibernate for 6 or 7 years, and then they'll come back out. By the way, you get that? Those of you that got it, you got it. They'll hibernate, they'll come back out, and this happens multiple times over and over, right? And then with each one of those things, there's an opportunity that God gives for his people to come back into relationship with him, and then there's more judgment that comes, right? So that's what Joel describes in chapter 1. Chapter 2, Joel enters the scene writing to a people who have been utterly destroyed. These are people that for the last 20, maybe 30 years have been watching their world be destroyed. And as little bit at a time, remember these waves of locusts would come in, and over the course of time, now they are sitting here in utter and complete devastation. Last week we saw that there is a way in which we are to respond to that. When the world crashes all around us, we saw that we still have time, and God is begging for us to come and be a part of his kingdom and to sit at his table. And remember, he tells us to rend our hearts and not our garments. And so when we come back to him, he says, stop worrying about the things on the outside and checking all your external boxes, but worry about the things on the inside. Rip your heart back open, right? So Joel is describing all these things, and then remember what he says in last week. He said, who knows whether he will not turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him. And I talked about how the beautiful thing that we know that God's judgment is not forever. We know that this is just a shadow of showing us the greater version of who he is and helping us to see who he is. And in return, he says, I will turn and relent from the disaster, and in the wake of that, I will leave a blessing behind. And what was that blessing? The blessing is a promise of the Holy Spirit that was to come at one point that we now have. So here the people are. They've been utterly destroyed and devastated. And now Joel continues to write, and he says, I don't want you to just know how you're to react when the world crashes around you, but I want to give you hope of restoration one day. So today I want you to see from the next part of chapter 2, miraculous restoration. I mentioned earlier, but when we'll get to it here in a minute in verse 25, Joel 25 is probably one of my all-time favorite verses in the entire Bible. It's miraculous, it's beautiful, and Joel says that he is going to show, God is going to restore back the things that have been lost. So I want you to see miraculous restoration. Let me read here as we continue our reading, and we're going to start at verse 18. So we ended last week at verse 17, and he says you need to consecrate, call together, come together, meet to worship, be together, right? And now we sort of take a little bit of a turn. In verse 18, he reads this. It says, then the Lord became jealous for his land and had pity on his people. And the Lord answered and said to his people, behold, I am sending to you grain, wine, and oil, and you will be satisfied. And I will no more make you a reproach among the nations. I will remove the northerner far from you and drive him into a parched and desolate land, his vanguard into the eastern sea, and his rear guard into the western sea. For the stench and the foul smell of him will rise, for he has done great things. So let me describe here real quick, if we haven't already understood these people, right? I want to make sure that we're very clear who Joel is writing to, because this is really, really important to understand what he's getting ready to describe to them. So back when this would have been written, these people, their only way of life to sustain life would have been agriculture. They grain, grapes, and things they would grow and livestock, right? That was it. That's how they made a living. And things based off of an agricultural existence was how they existed. It was everything to them. It wasn't just their food, it was their every way of life, right? Well, now, as these waves of locusts over the last 20 to 30 years have completely and utterly destroyed everything, I want you to imagine that you're in a spot where you have spent the last several years just wanting to be sustained. You've been starving. You've had nothing to eat. There's been a massive famine in the land. And let me just so we're all clear what this means. This means not just, we think famine in the land, people are struggling to eat. Like mass amounts of people are dying, right? Like bodies piling up from the years of famine around them. This isn't just like, oh man, like there's a shortage at the Walmart of rice. No, like there was no food. For years after the locusts had destroyed it all, it hadn't started, not just would it not grow yet, but the next wave would come and destroy anything that would start. I'm reminded of, there's a famous party of explorers back a couple 150 years ago or so, called the Donner Party, and you might know the story. But the Donner Party was a group of explorers that were trying to find a passage of trade up in the Arctic. And they took all their supplies with them that they thought they would need, and it wasn't what they needed. And they went out of their way, and they made it into the wilderness, and the snows come, and they find themselves in a desolate, dark, disgusting, terrible place. And they've run out of food, and they begin to do things like take bark off of trees, and they would boil the bark and make a soup out of bark soup. You got to be pretty hungry to have some bark soup. I enjoy being out in the wilderness, but I don't know if I can imagine having some bark soup. But that's how desperate they were, right? But it didn't stop there. You see, as the hunger began to set in, people begin to die. Once life is unable to be sustained, it leaves, right? You're not able to eat. Bark soup only goes so long. They had scraped off every possible thing they could, and they were way out in the middle of nowhere. There was no rescuing. There was no radios back then. They couldn't phone a friend. And they became so desperate that those that were left began to cut away at those that had passed and cannibalize just in order to get a little bit of sustenance to sustain their life. They went out of their way doing something that they would have never dreamed they would do just to scrape by and find something to feed on. That's what I want you to picture these people that Joel is talking to, all right? Joel is talking to people that have been completely devastated. I mean, they're at the point of feasting on things that you would never imagine feasting on. And just like the Donner Party had to take drastic measures to stay alive, I think there are times where we have everything set in front of us. And we feast off of the disgusting things that will not sustain. And Joel is promising the people, guys, the blessing is here and it's coming. And he says, I want you to know that Jesus, God our Father, and Holy Spirit have become jealous for your land, and they have had pity on you. So that sounds a little weird. Like, why would God have pity on his people? You see, God's pity is based out of the most beautiful and holy love that you could have. You see, God poured out himself to his people, and they rejected. And he was so saddened and hurt by what had happened to them. And as a result of their own rejection, their land had been destroyed. This army had come in, the locust army had come in and had destroyed everything. And what does he say? He says here in verse 20, he says, I will remove the northerner far from you. A little further down, he says, his vanguard into the eastern sea and his rear guard into the western sea. You know what he's saying? He's saying, hey, this army that just came, right? This army that was just there, this army that has destroyed everything, this army of locusts that took it all away, I am ripping it apart. No more will it wreak havoc and devastation in your life. I am king, I am ruler, and I am ripping it apart. I am throwing it as far as you can throw it from one side to the other. Imagine, he's literally like ripping this army in shreds and destroying it. So this is the power that he has. He says, I have become pitiful and saddened and heartbroken because my people have left me, and I want them to know how much I care. You see, God has taken and he has poured out pity on us. And he said, I want you so bad. I want you to be part of me. And you have rejected and you have ran away. And in that place, not only am I still here calling you and begging you to be here, I'm ripping away the enemy and I'm saying, please come have a seat at my table. God's pity comes out of the place of love for his people. And through the words of Joel, God is inviting his people back into his presence and saying, this is who I am. This is how much I want you. I want you with me so much, I'm destroying every possible way that would keep you from me. I've destroyed the enemy. I've ripped that away. I've destroyed it. There's nothing left standing in your way between you and me that you can now come and be in my presence. You see, part of why God was destroying this army and part of why God was making these people as now building them back up is that back in that day, you see, there was all sorts of other little countries and lands around that they worshiped their own gods, right? And they would worship their gods by bowing down and praying to their gods. And if they had bad things happen, the first thing that you would say about them is, well, I guess your God just ain't good enough. Well, I guess you didn't worship your God hard enough. So now imagine the absolute devastation the people of Israel would feel. Not just are they devastated on a level of physically not being able to sustain themselves, but now everybody around them would have looked at them as a laughingstock. Oh, I don't know who your God is, but you clearly haven't prayed enough. Look at your land, it's devastated. You've got nothing to eat. There's piles of bodies around from years of starving and famine. Who do you think you're like, what God are you praying to? You better get it together. And God has come back in and he says, no more will my people be the laughingstock. No more. But now I will rise you back up as a constant reminder of what I can do. You see, we were not able to give ourselves sustainability and food. That had to come back from God. And we see God continue that restoration here as we read down in verse 21. It says, fear not, O land. Be glad and rejoice, for the Lord has done great things. Fear not, ye beasts of the field, for the pastures of the wilderness are green. The tree bears its fruit. The fig tree and the vine yield their full fruit. Be glad, O children of Zion, and rejoice in the Lord your God, for he has given you the early rain for your vindication. He has poured down for you abundant rain, the early and the latter rain as before. The threshing floors will be made full of grain. I want you to see not just God's pity, but I want you to see God's beautiful restoration beginning. You see, in these passages, he has now described to us what it looks like to live back now in communion with him. You see, in the first part of Joel 1, we talked about the grain offering and the drink offering being completely removed, right? He has now said he's given that back. There's going to be enough back to have worship and communion with me once again. He has reestablished the way that we are to communicate and love on him. And he says, just come and be with me. Just come and sit in my presence. And he now promises, he says, I am going to begin now the restoration process. He says, fear not, all the land that has been devastated, don't worry. Well, just imagine if you're a stalk of grass trying to grow, what's the one thing you need to grow? A little bit of water, a little bit of rain, a little bit of sustenance. God says, fear not, O land. Fear not, O livestock. If you're somebody, if you're a cow, you need to eat some grass. How are you going to eat that grass if that grass ain't growing? It ain't going to happen. It says, fear not, it's coming. It's coming because the early rain is coming for your vindication. Be glad, O children, and rejoice. want you to see that God's restoration process has begun. In a land full of people wrought with devastation, looking around them saying, we have nothing, we have been destroyed, God says, oh, fear not. Oh, do not worry. I am here, I am coming, I am king, I am ruling. The early rain is here. Oh, this is so beautiful. You see, we have been given the early rain. He mentions the early rain for vindication, and he's poured down abundant rain, the early and the latter rain as before. I want you to know that God's restoration began when Jesus Christ entered back into this world, and he ripped sin fully apart. Just like Joel says, I'm going to rip the army and destroy them from one side to the other. He says, I am sending you back down a blessing. Remember last week, who knows whether he will not turn and relent? And I said, I know. I know because he's already done it. And this is that promise of his beginning of the restoration right now. He says, I am coming. And we know that he did come. And Jesus Christ, 2,000 years ago, miraculously entered back down into this earth. And for the first time in a long time, he made his presence known in this world on a permanent basis. You see, for the last thousands of years, God had recused himself from this world while sin ran rampant. Until his plan came to fruition when Jesus Christ came back down. When Jesus entered into this world, he entered back on a permanent basis, never to go anywhere ever again. Ripping away the enemy in one fell swoop, destroying him as he died. And as he rose again, he ripped that enemy of sin completely apart. And he says, now I have given you myself. The early rain, what is that? What do we have? We have Jesus Christ right here, present, eternally with us. Our lives that were once wrought with sin, devastation, pain, agony, loss, sorrow, terrible, horrible things. Our lives that were completely destroyed by sin. He says, I've sent you my restoration. He says, Jesus has come back. I love how he talks about the early and the latter rains, because the early rain means that this is not a blessing that is to come one day, but we have a right now blessing. May I tell you that when you accepted Jesus Christ and you chose to actively live with him every single day and enter back into relationship with him as you were made to do, what you were not saying is, I just want to go to heaven one day and miss out on hell. If that is the case, you've missed what salvation is. Because Jesus has said, I'm not giving you the latter rain one day, I'm giving you the rain. The rain is coming. I'm giving you the rain right now. And that rain right now is me, it's myself, it's the presence that you can now enter into. And may I tell you this morning that if you have come to know and love and trust Jesus Christ, your blessing is a right now blessing, not a one day blessing. The reality of your salvation is that you gain Jesus. It's not that you miss hell and go to heaven, it's that you gain Jesus. And as a result of gaining Jesus, you miss the punishment that was to come and you remain with him forever where he is. And so may I just encourage you this morning that as God begins to restore our souls, that you're not looking to a future one day for him to restore, but let him start now. Embrace the restoration now. I have to preach this to myself every day. Am I just looking at my salvation as a get out of hell free card? As a, well, I don't want the punishment, but I want the good, so I guess I'll pray this prayer and I'll check these boxes. Maybe I'll even come to church. And he's saying, no. He's saying, you have me. You have so much more than sitting in a pew. You have me. You have so much more than just going about your day and doing the Christian things. You have me. Will you not embrace me? He says, I've given you the early rain right now. Jesus begins that process of restoration right now by sending his son, entering back into this world and destroying sin and regaining his place of proper authority in this world. He says, please, I know what sin has caused. I know the utter devastation that it has caused in this world and in your lives. I'm giving you a way to begin that restoration. And that way is me. You have the one that you were made to be a part of. You see, where the story really comes into light and comes into focus is that when you realize that you were made to be in relationship with him at the beginning. You see, the early reigns of having Jesus would mean nothing if it wasn't that we were created to have that in the first place. And when sin came in and it ripped us away from God and it ripped us away from having that response or that relationship with him, we were unable to have that. And he says, I am sending you the early rains. You have blessing now. So I ask you, and I encourage you, and I encourage me this morning, will you live in the light of Jesus and his early rain right now? And I mean rain like rain falling. I mean, there's a pun there too, because he is raining, but the rain falling rain. Live in the rain as he reigns on earth. It's good. But I encourage you, don't look forward to something coming one day, but take full hold of the blessing that he has given you now. Spend time with Jesus now. Be with him now. A little later, we are going to partake of the table this morning as we remember what he's done, his sacrifice he's done. It's a symbol of what's to come. But do not just do this as a symbol of something, but do it as a representation of your heart right now, saying, I want to be present with Jesus. I want to acknowledge what he's done for me, his sacrifice of shedding his blood and giving of his body and doing something for me. I invite you, as we partake of this table, don't do this as a symbol just to say I've done it, but do it as a reality of me saying right now, in this moment, in my life, I want to embrace every aspect of Jesus fully, not so that one day I can go to heaven, not so that I can just make sure I'm not going to the bad place. Not so that I can make sure I'm missing out on the punishment. But because more than any of that, I gain Jesus right now. I gain a best friend more than I could ever have. I gain somebody who has done more for me than I could ever imagine. And may I encourage you and urge you, let his work of early restoration begin now in your hearts and your lives and make it so much more than just I will go to heaven one day. But enjoy his presence now. I'm so thankful that he has given us the early rain. We get to experience a little bit of that future restoration. You see, the reality is that sin has devastated our world. The reality is many of us, if not all of us in here, have experienced devastating, debilitating effects from sin in our lives. And while the promise of Jesus right now is a tangible promise, may I tell you that it is just simply a foreshadowing of the beauty that is to come. And while in this world right now, Jesus says that he is enough, and he is, that presence, the reality of Jesus, is just a foretelling that one day, we will be fully, forever, and completely restored. And so with that in mind, let us look to this next verse. And I want you to understand the power and the weight and the gravity of this verse. And I want to do something, actually. I'm going to ask everybody to stand up with me as we read this verse. And we're going to read it together. Chapter 2, verse 25. I want us to read together this verse all aloud. And I want you to imagine, as we read this, I don't want you to imagine the pain and the loss that you're holding on to. I want you to imagine the suffering that has taken place in your heart. I want you to imagine the grief and the sorrow and the pain that you hold on to. As we read this verse, let us read together verse 25. I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter, my great army, which I sent among you. Thank you. You may be seated. I will restore to you the years that these four locusts have eaten. The pain, the grief, the loss, the hurt, the heartache, the time spent. He says, I promise I promise I will make it all new one day. I promise I will restore back what was lost. It is coming. I've given you now the early rain. I'm on my way. It's a foreshadowing that one day what will happen is that it will all be made right and it will be made whole. But I want you to know that in the meantime, there's so much more than just a promise of one day. In the meantime, I want you to hear me. I want you to hear the good news of the gospel of Jesus, that when he says, I will restore to you the years. Look, I wish I could sit up here and tell you exactly how he does it. But my God is a supernatural, bigger God than this brain can even comprehend. I just want you to know that he has a way, when you enter into a relationship with him on a beautiful, holy way, he has a way of taking that pain and that hurt and that loss, and by putting himself in its place, he restores that heart back to himself. And no, the pain may not ever be fully gone. No, the loss may not ever fully be gone. But in its place, what you gain is something more than what you would get if you hold on to it, because you gain Jesus. And I want you to hear that while we have gone through so much hurt and heartache, I've seen the effects of sin wreak devastation in my own life and family as we have lived in a world where sin reigns fully and supremely. While Jesus is battling it and we are battling it with him, it is not fully destroyed until one day he is doing the work. But because of that sin still here, I want you to know that we do experience the pains of this earth, and we do experience those things. And I ask you, what would it look like for you now in this moment to say, I'm experiencing the hurt and the pain and the loss? To in its place, instead of holding on to the suffering and the pain, say, I gained Jesus. And in the most miraculous way, and I wish I could find a way to even describe it in words what he does, but in the place of the hole in your heart that was filled with anger and hate and loss and grief and questions without answers, in its place, Jesus pours in, and you gain the presence of the most beautiful Savior. And in the way that only he can do, he begins to mend that hole back. And he begins to literally sew himself into the fabric of your heart that has been ripped open. And he begins to mend it with himself, and his own suffering and his own person and his own love begins to wrap into your own heart where the rip once was. He mends it back with himself, and it becomes something totally new and totally beautiful that only he can do. May I encourage you this morning that Jesus has promised he will restore the years that have been lost. It's a supernatural thing. Jesus, he's turning back time. He says he's turning back time in our hearts. And in a way that only he can do, he gives us back what was lost by gaining him. He supernaturally has a way to bring back years of lost time, relationships, status, experience, purity, people. And he promises to restore the effects of that sin, beginning now, and one day fully being restored in his most beautiful and glorious presence forever and ever and ever. I love, too, that he specifically mentions that he will restore to you the years that these 4 different locusts have eaten up. Let me call your attention back to what those 4 waves of locusts were all about. He says in the first wave of locusts, he took away the luxuries of our life. In the second wave of locusts, we have been taken away the opportunity for worship. The wine and the drink offering were taken away from the people. In the third wave of locusts, all things had been destroyed. There was nothing left to sustain life. And in the fourth wave of locusts, he calls together the body and says, now it's time to consecrate together. I want you to know that he promises to restore all 4 of those things. He says, I promise to restore the beauty of fellowship as you have consecrated your body together. Body together, believers, not your individual body. Although you can do that too. Do that too, please. But he promises to restore back the body in a wholesome and beautiful way. He promises to restore back the things that we needed for life and sustenance. He's given us himself. He says, I've got it. Physically with the people, he actually set the reins down, and they begin to eat again and feast and have much of it, and their grain and their drink offering were given back. That's the third thing he says, I promise to restore my fellowship with you as you've now have an abundance of things. And then in the last way, he says, I've also promised to restore back those things that were lost that you never thought you would be given again, the luxuries of life. Now, here, what I'm not saying is that when you follow Jesus, he's giving you back all the pristine desires of your physical heart. Hear me out. What he's saying is, by giving back the luxuries of life, by gaining Jesus, you've gained so much more than any physical attribute you could ever desire, any money that could ever buy anything. By gaining Jesus back, you have gained so much more than what we could ever come up with. He will restore the 4 things that were lost, specifically. You see, God is a God of restoration in a very specific and tangible way. He continues here in verse 26 saying, you shall eat and be plenty. Eat in plenty and be satisfied. Praise the name of the Lord your God. He has dealt wondrously with you, and my people shall never again be put to shame. You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and that there is none else. And my people shall never again be put to shame. You see, his restoration comes so that we might be as shining, beautiful, glorious lights of the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world around us. Remember, the people would have been made a laughingstock, sitting in utter devastation. They would have been sitting around, and the other lands around them would have been laughing, making fun. Now, where your life was once filled with destruction, where you were a laughingstock, God has flipped the script. And he says, no more. No more are you fit for destruction, but you're fit for service in my house. No more was your life a life marred with sin and pain and torment and destruction, but now I've set you up as something that others can look to and see my beauty and grace. And just like these people, as they would have been restored, as the rains would have come, as their grains would have been growing, and as their country got back to normal things, as the people around them would have looked and said, well, I guess maybe your God really does exist. So too we, as shining emblems of what Jesus can do when he takes the broken and he makes them beautiful, we stand before not just him, but from the world around us, and others can look into our lives and see the broken made beautiful for the purpose of others seeing and acknowledging him. I use this illustration, and I'm going to describe it. It's much better seen visually. But in Japan, they have an art form, and I'm not even going to begin to pronounce the word because it's going to sound terrible coming out of my mouth. I'm just going to call it art form. In Japan, they've got this art form where they take broken pieces of pottery and they rebuild them. And there was this beautiful production done where this gentleman who is a believer is talking about what it looks like to do this pottery. And the way that they mend these broken pieces of pottery back together is they'll use precious metals as the glue. So they'll use bits of gold or silver. And so you can imagine this pottery having a shattered, cracked line, and as it's put back together, it doesn't look seamlessly perfect. It looks like a gold vein running down it. And he tells this beautiful story about how when the tsunami came through years ago, many people, these vessels of pottery have been passed down for generations in these worlds. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, these teapots and these tea kettles and these pottery vessels have been passed down. And the tsunami came in and it wreaked devastation, and people's heirlooms had been destroyed. And so these people would go in and they would restore these pots. But what he described was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. He said, we are not mending broken, but we are making something new with the broken pieces. And I want you to know that that's exactly what Jesus has done in our hearts. You see, Jesus takes the broken pieces of our lives, and he doesn't just super glue it all back together, say, look at that beautiful thing. Look at Seth, he just looks so nice and neat and put together. Got a haircut. But what he does is he weaves himself into it, And he doesn't just remake the broken, but he makes something completely whole and new out of it. It's a new creation. And just like this pottery vessel, they even so far as to give it a new name. They rename this piece from what it was before because it is not what it was before. It is something new and different, woven together with these beautiful, precious metals. And you see, I want you to know that if you're experiencing the hurt and the pain and the destruction that sin has caused and has wreaked havoc in your life, I want you to know that Jesus doesn't just take and fix it and make it all perfect and better. He makes something completely new and beautiful as he weaves himself in the pieces of your life that have been ripped away, and he glues himself into it. And so that when others look around you, they can't help but see the beauty and the love of Jesus as he is restoring your life and your heart from something that was destroyed and ugly and has turned it into something beautiful and holy. And so may I invite you this morning, by the way, I know what I'm asking. It's hard. What I'm asking is, the hurt, the loss, the pain that sin has left. I'm asking that those holes that have been ripped away, that you take Jesus and you let him mend them. Because I promise you, a life with Jesus is better than any pain you can hold on to. A life with Jesus is better than any hole that has been left by the loss of someone or some relationship or sin wreaking havoc. Jesus is so much better. And I know what I'm asking. It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to give it to him and say, Jesus, come and mend my broken. But may I encourage you to please hear the good news of the gospel of Jesus, that he has taken the brokenness. He's made it beautiful. I will restore to you the years that have been destroyed. I'll make it all new. It starts now. And one day, you see, in the midst of giving up that pain, you know what you're still going to have? Scars. Okay? I know that. When you give that up to him, you still have the residual effects of the broken. And one day, Jesus has promised that all those scars, residual effects, will be forever cleaned up. And you will mirror the perfect image of Jesus Christ one day when he calls his people fully to himself, when he fully and completely and utterly destroys sin forever and ever and ever, and we enter into his presence eternally and fully with him only, without the presence of sin. It will be completely holy and beautifully made new. And so I ask a hard thing. Can we focus on the beautiful restoration of the gospel of Jesus? You see, not just did Jesus tell us that we were created to be in his image. This is a beautiful gospel story. It tells us who we were, and sin devastated that, and he gave us himself. But we get to my most favorite part of the gospel story, and I talk about this all the time. I love his redemption. It's beautiful. You have to have it. But what I really love is restoration. Because we are promised that beginning with our linkage back to Jesus, he is restored. And we now are part of God's reclamation project here on this earth. So I ask you and I ask me, are our lives looking like God's reclamation project? Or are we still looking like a broken piece of pottery's vessel, just waiting to be picked up and put back together? I invite you this morning, if you say, my heart has been broken and destroyed, what would it look like for you to fully and completely give that life to Jesus? Believer, maybe you know him, you trust him, you hold on to him, but it's really hard to let him have those pieces. What would it look like to let Jesus live out his promise of restoration in your life? In your life. Not your brothers, not your sisters, nobody but you. What would it look like for you to let him live out that restoration project? And then what would it look like for you to then take your fully restored and beautiful, scarred person and say, world, I'm a shining vessel. Praise be to Jesus for what he's done. But I want you to know, that because of my brokenness, he has made me a whole new vessel. And you can have what I have. Are you actively part of God's reclamation project here on earth?